By popular request, I will now end my World Rapid Chess Championship coverage with the final round review of Hikaru Nakamura's draw versus Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen, as we know, is the World Rapid Chess Champion here in 2019. After this game, he was crowned as such, and Hikaru Nakamura, for the second year in a row, finishes in a tie for second place and gets third on tiebreaks for the second year in a row. I want to review the game and show that while it wasn't the most exciting battle between these two guys that we've ever had, it does have some theoretical significance. They actually repeated the opening they played at the 2019 Sinquefield Cup, and what does that mean for future battles between these two guys? We are left to ponder, but I do make some suggestions that maybe where White has a more dynamic and aggressive way to try to get some flexibility in this line of the Rossalimo, and I have some fun poking at an idea that maybe Hikaru Nakamura could have played for at the end instead of taking a draw if he really wanted to play for a win. So hopefully you stick around and watch all those moments, and without any further ado, let's dive in to this game here from Day 3 of the World Rapid Chess Championship. We get a Rossalimo here, Hikaru Nakamura playing the white pieces. Magnus Carlsen's new favorite weapon is black. After g6, Rekarovka, bishop g7, rook e1, we get the move e5. Now, obviously, there are a lot of options here for black to play for that aren't as structurally, I guess, stagnant as e5. Some people even suggesting that Magnus already committing to playing for a draw here with black. Obviously, doing so would clinch the title, so you can't really begrudge him that. I don't really think that's the case. E5 is just one of many options, and yes, it does lead to some closed structures, but I think depending on what white and black want to do later, there's still plenty of opportunities for dynamic play. I guess if you're just evaluating it objectively, not going into the deep chess theory we know these guys bring, you are looking at a very sort of stuck and closed structure here when black commits to E5. White takes on C6. This is typical. You part ways with the bishop pair, but in doing so, give black these long-term kind of positional problems. D3, queen to C7, bishop E3, B6. This is all theory again, and it was played at the Sinquefield Cup in St. Louis in 2019 with the same colors. A3, A5. This is all typical. White is in this structure looking to get B4. It's a way you sort of punch through and try to expose these double pawns. And I think when people first see this idea, they go, why would you want to play B4 and voluntarily undouble black's pawns? But the point is, if you can do so and fully blow open the queen side, you're going to get other targets behind it, right? And that's the idea, is white just wants to win. You don't want to stare at ugly duckling pawns just for the fun of it, right? You want to win the game, and A3 and B4 is trying to open up dynamic play for white on the queen side. So knight D2, knight F6, and then on that note, white goes for it with B4. The problem is that this move leads to exactly the game they had at the Sinquefield Cup in 2019, and honestly, it kind of, in my opinion, was Hikaru not necessarily playing for I guess the most sharpest theory, if you will. And it's not because he doesn't have an edge. And I think it was actually maybe a smart choice by Hikaru because it's a very two-result position with the knights versus the bishop in the bad structure for black later. And I'm not one to criticize Hikaru, not qualified to do so for him or Magnus. But I don't think it offers enough dynamic differences in terms of what we already had, which was a draw between these two guys in St. Louis, if you were really looking for the best winning chances as white, right? Now, on that note, what would I suggest otherwise? I'm not really qualified to do so, but I analyzed this for a while. I think if you want to avoid the forcing line that happens after b4 with knight g4, where the bishop is traded for the knight, is what Magnus did, you may need to consider a move like h3. So I looked at h3 and showed that the idea is very simple. You're just stopping knight g4 with the hope of getting b4 and keeping this bishop on the board so that it can do dirty things over here on the queen side. You lose a tempo, allowing the move knight d7. Black can retreat to kind of be ready for b4. But after the move c3, preparing b4, bishop a6, queen c2, I looked at this for a while. There's a lot of variations in it again, but because I'm not playing at a professional level and not qualified to do so, I do think that white has more chances to be playing for an edge in this middle game still, right? You're structurally better. You still have b4 coming. The d-pawn is not really a weakness in a lot of these positions here because it's easily defended. So I think that if white wants an edge, maybe h3 is a move to consider, right? So here you go. Danny recommended novelty. Probably terrible. There you have it. But the other thing is that I liked h3 because originally when I went for it, I'll just show this fun line. I had the idea of playing h3 with the sole purpose of stopping knight g4, but then going all in with the sack anyway. The fun idea is you give up the pawn with the point that after queen a4, c5, and c3, you want to expose the light squares. The problem is you get here a little bit too slow, and even though white has some weird compensation, I don't think that if you don't get the knight to d5, I don't think it's worth sacking the pawn. So anyway, in the end, this is a topical line, which is why I justified the extra time of me wasting my time, neglecting my wife and children, and analyzing some chess today. And I won't go into everything I looked at with h3 and c3, but just to say that this is a topical way for white and black to play. I won't be surprised if we see this again. I won't be surprised if we see this move h3, and whether it leads to anything, of course, remains to be seen. But Hikaru played b4. What does it do? It opens up the position on the queen side, but because you haven't taken the time to stop knight g4, you don't get the full Monty, right? You don't get the full pressure on the dark squares I talked about. After the trade and takes on e3, we get exactly the position that they had at the 2019 Sinquefield Cup in St. Louis. Knight c4, bishop e6, knight fd2, castles, and here the move rook to b1 is the first novelty, so to speak. Rook f1 was played by Hikaru in St. Louis, and after a few more moves, ultimately we had a draw. Not necessarily similar fashion. The one thing I will say is this was a totally different approach from Hikaru, if we just quickly go through the moves, from St. Louis than he played here in Moscow today. But ultimately, it still kind of was the same position where, yeah, white's better when you look at it structurally with the two knights, and black has weaknesses all over the place. Doubled c-pawns, a-pawn, f-pawn, but there's just no beef, right? There's no way for white to get anything, which is why they ultimately kind of tickled this one out, right? They played tickle and went home peacefully. So that's what happened on the move 16, rook to f1 by Hikaru Nakamura as we get back to that position. Today he played rook b1, right, trying to go for something a little bit different, but ultimately kind of the same result. He does get this queen to c3 more directly. I did like this plan. When I first saw the game and it was live, I was thinking, Hikaru's improved on the Sinquefield Cup approach. Maybe he actually has winning chances here. Objectively, I like the queen and the knight versus these weak pawns. The problem is that, again, Magnus has clearly analyzed this position deeply, because after rook f1, rook b5, f6, look at this. We got the mirror same structure that they had from the Sinquefield Cup, and there's just nothing to it. h5 kind of proved that, because the moment we saw Hikaru play queen a1, I started being like, there's not enough here, right? Queen a1 basically offers the draw, and it was accepted by Magnus. What did I say was my outside way that white could play? When I was first watching the game, I was still thinking, okay, yes, this is very similar, but Hikaru has some small improvements. The knight and queen working together against the queenside weaknesses. What's his plan going to be? The plan I was looking for him to go for starts with the move knight b2. What's my crazy idea? I want to change positions of the knights and ultimately get this knight to c3, where it can hit the rook and go after a4. If I can push black back, maybe then I can focus on targeting these c-pawns. Unfortunately, with good timing, I made some silly moves for black, but with good timing, it just doesn't work. If you back the queen up to a1, black can actually take c4, and when you back up something like knight c3, your c-pawn becomes weaker than my a-pawn, and black is actually in fantastic shape. If you don't play that impatiently and you don't play queen to a1, let's say you go back to e1 instead so your queen can maybe guard c4. I looked at this so that you can eventually play knight d1, and when the trade happens, your queen is already guarding it. The problem is you get knight c3, and after queen a5, I still didn't see a way to make progress, because now you've sacrificed the queen position to guard c4, and so black is owning the only real open areas of the board. There's some more analysis here that I put into it, but let's be honest, you guys probably don't care anyway. And I think that it just shows that while this line has now been tried a couple different ways by Hikaru, the more aggressive F-file approach from St. Louis, this sort of positional maneuver, I just don't think it has enough bite, and it's why we make my official suggestion. No secret novelties for this guy. I think h3 is maybe just a way to add some spice to the position if you just want to stop those forcing lines with knight g4. There you have it. That's my review of the slightly tame finish here between Hikaru Nakamura and Magnus Carlsen. Ultimately, as we know, it led to this photo opportunity from Maria Emrilinova, our amazing photographer on site, catching those two guys stepping away, and Magnus Carlsen all smiles, of course. And of course, we have the final standings, as this is my final video from the World Rapid coverage. I'll just show it for you to make sure you have the snapshot you were looking for. Farusha, Nakamura, Artemiev, you've now seen videos of at least one game by all these guys today. Shout out to Hikaru. Love you, buddy. I didn't have time to do the victories over Smirin and others, and, Hikaru really did play great today on day 3. But again, pretty exciting to see some young players in there mix the Firouzja, the Artemiev, the Dubov, the Duda, right? That's the future right there. And Magnus Carlsen gets the victory, wins the World Rapid Chess Championship, and with it, sends the rest of us home to enjoy the World Blitz Championship that starts tomorrow. Thanks for enjoying this video. Share it with your friends. I appreciate it. Peace out. Love you the most. And I'll see all my Chess.com companions over on Chess.com.